Welcome in. This is Hype Factor, a Fantasy Critic podcast for all the Fantasy Critic enthusiasts out there who just can't get enough of talking about Fantasy Critic. This is episode 3, where we're going to be doing a deep dive on waiver wire strats. I'm John. I am joined today by my good friend Marcus. Marcus, how's it going?
Things are doing really good, John. I'm happy. We're finally through Fantasy Critic draft season. I'm really excited to
Mm-hmm.
get talking to you tonight about kind of the next step, the waiver wire, and it's going to be a good discussion. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So before we get going, tell me, how was your draft? How did it go? How many did you participate in? What's going on with you, Marcus?
I think they went pretty good. I'm quite happy with how my drafts went. I'm in 4 leagues. I guess I should say that
Oh,
right off
wow.
the top. 4 different leagues this year. That's first for me. I don't think I've ever done more than 3. So it was a lot, but good. I think that one thing I was looking at all my teams after the fact, and I ended up with a lot of similar games. A lot of the games that we talked about last episode. So not enough people are listening to our shows to kind of steal all my games from me. So maybe that'll change as we kind of move forward here. But I was able to get Civilization 7 a couple of times. I think I picked up Pirate Yakuza, which is a big one that I'm high on. I was able to get Tales of Iron 2, which is coming out soon. Trying to think what else I got that Atelier Yumiya, which again is a
Yes.
really long title that I've never played, but I know that these games score well, so I got that in a few leagues. And yeah, I was pretty overall pretty happy with how my went this season. So, how about you? How are things going for you?
Good. I am in 2 leagues and they both went, I would say, fairly well. The energy and the kind of community that goes into it is just great on draft days. Like both of them did live drafts, getting together with people and friends that you've either part of the communities or people that you've just met is just, it's a good feeling. And yeah, generally happy with the games I selected. I think I had 2 Point Museum in both of my leagues. So let's
Yep.
hope for the best there. Um, you know, uh, Same as you, kind of focus on some of those games with release dates that we've been targeting. The one downside was probably there were some people in one of my leagues that did listen to our
Oh,
podcast, and
okay.
it did definitely bite me in the ass. So
Oh,
for
okay.
what it's worth, a
Yeah.
lot of those indies were gone. So, Hambo and Johnny, shout out to you for really messing
Yep.
with the strats.
Yep.
Um, but also, yeah, I also had one moment in one of my leagues where I ended up drafting Silk Song. I'm a little nervous. I'm more nervous today than I was when I first drafted it, but I was last. So I was dead last out of 10. So picking last, and it dropped all the way to the end of the second round. And I thought I was ninth out of 10 positions, and I thought I could take it safely and then still pick up Rift to the Necrodancer.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that did not happen. I should have reversed those selections,
Mm.
taken Rift to the Necrodancer first. But all in all, we'll get to why like things might be moving on the Silk Song front. But I'm hopeful still. I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
It was not counterpicked. It was not
Yes.
counterpicked, so I
Oh,
still have a
okay.
note. So
You still
yeah,
have an out. So my thing with Silk Song, as we discussed it last episode, was I think that I just don't want to be on the Silk Song ride
yeah.
anymore. I'm off the
I'm
ride, but I don't think it's a terrible pick. Certainly at the end of the second round, like it's got some real upside potential, and kind of especially with the opportunity to still drop it, you didn't get it counterpicked.
Yeah.
I think that
That's what I
it
did last year. So
yeah yeah yeah
let's do one more time. Yeah, I told the people in that league that I did it as community service so that they don't have to pull
there you
their
go.
hair out at every conference, at every,
That's right.
direct. It'll just
Yeah.
be my job to do that again this year. So looking forward to that. Um, so yeah, no, it's been a great start to the year. Looking forward to what comes next. And
Hmm.
with that, maybe we'll switch gears and talk about uh, our kind of main topic for today's episode, which is the waiver wire. So, in our first episode, we did kind of the basic overview of what Fantasy Critic is. Episode 2, we really did a deep dive on the draft and draft strategy. And today, we really want to get into the weeds of the waiver wire. So, Marcus, why don't you kick us off? What are some of the things that you use and employ when thinking about what games to draft or pick up off the waiver wire?
Well, I think the first thing that I'm looking at is games that I've identified at the draft that I didn't end up drafting that were still high on my radar. And those are games that I'm probably going to first because I was high on them, right? So those are probably ones that I'm looking at initially. And I think that what ends up often happening with the waiver wire is there tends to be a pretty big flurry of activity right post
Hmm.
draft, right? There's a lot of ads and drops kind of in that period. Maybe we can talk about how your strategy might change a little bit kind of in that first initial period as opposed to kind of the subsequent weeks. But yeah, I think that's the first thing that I'm always looking at is targeting some games that I had on my draft radar, but I didn't draft them because there were others that are a little bit higher priority. And yeah, that's kind of one of the things that I'm looking at.
And for me, I think it's similar. I'm obviously looking at that list. I will also, obviously, depending on the league rules, the two leagues that I'm in this year don't have mid-season counter picks. So the counter picks are only made at the draft. And what that means is that it allows for the flexibility and a little bit more risk taking post draft.
Yeah.
So that's where I may not want to be saddled with something where I'm maybe chasing a date or a release date, or I'm just not 100% sure, but I kind of want to hold on to it. That's when I'm deploying that strategy to really grab the things that I wasn't 100% sure of. I didn't want them counterpicked. I didn't want them locked in, but they're still high on my list. And as such, I kind of go after them early.
Yeah,
So
I think
that's,
like
yeah.
that makes a ton of sense in those leagues, especially when there is the no mid season counter picks. And I think like one
Mhm.
of the big things that will kind of hammer on with this waiver wire strategy is your strategy really will change depending on what your league rules are. Maybe now might be a good time to kind of like talk about some pretty important league, I don't know, variations, I guess, that might dictate what your waiver wire strategy would be. You've already mentioned one of the big ones is that mid-season counter pick. Like if you are playing in a league that has done all of their counter picking at the draft, there's really very little risk, or there may be very little risk in picking up almost anything, even games that are a very long shot of coming out because they can't be counterpicked. You may have the opportunity to drop them if they don't end up coming out afterwards. So that's one of the things. Another big one would be like whether or not you're able to drop games in an unlimited sort of fashion, or whether they or not they have to have a like confirmed release date, or whether or not yeah. I guess how would you phrase this kind of like dropping kind
Yeah,
of
limited
limitations?
drops. Yeah,
Yeah,
limited drops. And whether it's on, like, I can give you an example. So I'm in one league where we have unlimited drops for games that are not set to release. So if they're
right,
TBA or they're long shots, you can kind of have them and drop them as need to be. Um, but if it does have a release date, so games that will release, so even if it's saying 2025, we have it limited to just one drop. And so
right,
you have to be very judicious in terms of what you're picking up and putting and dropping, and even what you're drafting. Like it's almost, I gotta say, I think no one in that league has every team on their current publisher list with a 2025 confirmed release date. You have to take some risk on. It just has to be very calculated. But again, to your point, this is what's going to determine kind of what you do next in terms of the waiver wire. For that league, one of the first things I did was really target games that have a defined release date. We'll get into some of that later today. um, and it really does influence your approach, and it's in very stark contrast to a league where there's unlimited drops and there's no mid-season counter pick, and you can kind of roam the waiver wire freely and kind of take big swings.
there's very little risk about kind of like filling out your roster. You may be using some of your budget to kind of bid on the games to fill out your roster, but that's really the only cost of doing it. So I would strongly advocate in the leagues um, that have unlimited drops and don't have a mid-season counter pick, which I happen to play in. I think two that are like that. Like
Mhm.
you fill out your roster sooner rather than later. It doesn't mean that you're not going to make moves later on. It just
Mhm.
means that you're kind of like you're kind of planting your flag on a few games, and if Wolverine comes out, even if it might be a long shot, chances are if it does come out at the end of the year, you want to be able to potentially have that on your team early on before it gets snapped up, you know, when after the conference in the summer when it gets announced, right? It's better to sit on it now if there's very low cost of having it on your roster right now, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned minimum waiver bids. So, obviously you have to take up some of your budget. I've been in leagues, even one currently, where it's a $0 minimum bid. So there really is that encouragement to make moves and make a lot of them. My other league has a $5 minimum bid. So you can imagine you have
Oh,
to be
interesting.
very, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really up the ante. You got to be way more calculated. It kind of sets a new threshold for when you kind of make a selection because you do have to fill out the roster with that limited budget. Um, and it can really change kind of how you approach it. So different approaches for sure. Like I've completely different styles in terms of picking up games.
There's a league that I'm playing in that doesn't allow you to drop games that you haven't drafted. So you have to be darn sure that if you're putting in a bid for a game
Interesting.
that you that is coming out this year. And in that league there's also mid-season counter picks. So it's
Mm,
like you have to be really darn sure. It's kind of like those are the two opposite ends of the spectrum, like having unlimited drops for any reason, no mid-season counter picks. That's kind of one end, and then like not being able to drop a game and potentially having these games mid-season counter picks. Like it's like the two kind of extremes.
yeah, I can only imagine. I'm just trying to think how that would affect things, affects it
You
significantly.
just
Yeah.
I basically so in this league I picked up one game that in the following the draft in because there was really everything else had been picked that I felt really good about, and so I only picked up one game, and we still have I don't know 5 or 6 empty slots. So I'll be just probably sitting with a lot of empty slots for a
What
good part of the
like
year, right?
what an interesting customer like this Fantasy Critic is so good for this. Like we've talked about before how it can be customized to different communities and kind of what you want to get out of it. That's amazing. Like we still haven't even seen like we've seen anyway, there's so many different ways of integrating just more gamification of this like it's amazing. It's
Hmm.
really really creative. I think we're seeing it grow year over year in terms of different ways of you know setting up league rules to have some really interesting outcomes.
Yeah, it is really neat. I would say, given all this variability, what we are both happen to be managers, league managers
Mm, yeah.
for a couple of leagues that we're in. What is your preferred one? Do you have a preferred one?
Hmm. That's a good question. Wow, wasn't ready for that one. I'm gonna think I actually like, and maybe it's because I've done this a few times, and I think we said this in episode one or two. Um, I like when there's restricted drops.
Hmm.
Maybe not as restrictive as we're doing this year because I'm a little nervous, but I like when there's restricted drops because it really forces you to add a layer of like calculus into your bids. So much so, and maybe we'll talk about this later in the year, where last year I was looking at how many drops other players had already used and where they were handcuffed was actually influencing how I was making waiver wire
Hmm.
selections, and I kind of love that. But that might be a little bit too intense for for a lot of people. I can see why like having it open is also entertaining because, like you said, I could put Wolverine on my team. I could put a number of things. I saw Ninja Gaiden somehow was selected by a couple percent publishers already. I'm like, I don't know. At
Right.
least they were taking swing. They were swinging from last week, so we're going to get into that. But so both have their pros and cons. I think I tend a little bit more towards that really strategic, um, maybe a little bit diabolical side of how to how to engage with the waiver wire.
I think that like I've been thinking about this a lot. That's why I kind of posed the question. And like I've always been gravitating towards like have as much freedom as possible. Kind of I've
Hmm.
had the opportunity for in a few years to kind of like do be involved in at least whether it was managing or just like having some input into what rules we're going to implement. And I was like, it's a long season. There's I think like the idea that you want to encourage people to be able to be active and participate. And if you're maybe a little too restrictive into what they can actually do, it might be a bit of a turnoff. I'm not sure if that's true. That's always kind of been my perception. And so like I was always in favor of like open as possible. But what ends up happening is exactly what I described in a few minutes ago, is like when you have such an open system with very little consequence for adding games, people sit on games. They sit
Mm,
on games, and it's a valid strategy. I think it's completely within the rules, and I do it as much as anybody else. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best. So I actually think that I like the idea of having unlimited moves, but
mm,
I like the idea of having putting the midseason counter picks in to at least kind of check it a
hmm.
bit. It kind of
A
like,
little bit. Yep.
yeah, yeah. I
It
think
would
that
definitely
that's where I've
change how
settled on.
people play. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not a bad middle ground. It's something interesting to think about. Um, I do think sitting on games also has its own risk. I mean, we'll talk about that in waiver wire strategy, but like at some point you got to be targeting things that are actually coming out. Like it's
it's
great to have
true.
all these like large games. I usually try and have a balance. We'll talk about kind of the different models of waiver wire strategy, but um,
Well, it's kind of an
yeah,
opportunity
there's
cost
risk
thing,
in there.
right? Like
Hmm.
it's like if I'm sitting here, like if we'll use our Marvel's Wolverine as an
Hmm.
example, right? Like we like that game will score well, probably kind of in that 85 plus range when it comes out. So you're fairly confident in that, but it's just like at what point do I decide to cut bait? Because there's
Yeah,
games that are going to be coming out kind of all along until that, whether a date that it is actually coming out or it's confirmed that it isn't coming out. So you're kind of like you're filling a roster spot with a question mark. And so at some point you have to make a decision. Is it worth me holding on to this and potentially
yeah,
like waiting so long that there's by the time I decide to drop it, there's nothing else for me to, and I've passed all of these other things. So it isn't without risk, kind of like filling out your roster, but I like the idea of being able to kind of maybe check that a little bit, even a little bit
yeah,
more than that. Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting.
Hmm.
Well, I'm curious to see how the season goes and kind of how every different experiences in different leagues kind of reflect on how people actually make their selections. I've always thought, like when I look at Fantasy Critic, I always see kind of like the three modes, and you mentioned like there's always a flurry of activity after the draft, and I always go ahead and notice like three types of players. One, the person that kind of just like fills out the roster immediately with everything that they can,
Yeah.
which might be a valid strategy, especially if there's no kind of restrictions. The individual that makes no moves early, the
Hmm.
person that's kind of just waiting on the big conferences, the E3s or what have you, the directs that are going to kind of indicate where they go and what kind of choices they make. And then there's somewhere in between. And
Hmm.
obviously, this is going to depend. And somewhere in between, for me, kind of that Goldilocks level, it obviously depends on kind of the league rules. But in both situations, whether there are restrictions or there aren't, I'm usually kind of following kind of a similar logic. And this is the one where I land. I don't know about you, Marcus, but for me, if there are restrictions, I'm still going to target, as we kind of commented on earlier, those games that I had high on my draft list that have probably a release date that I know I want to hold on to, that I can kind of add. And I want to do that with one or two early on to ensure, and this is where I kind of get into um, how many roster spots you have to actually fill over the course of the year. This to me determines a lot. I always am very anxious about having a large number of gaming spots that you have to fill out, especially when at those conferences and those other announcements, you're going to have everybody competing over the same games. Like
Yep.
everybody's competing over the same games. They're all going to put large amounts of their budget towards it. There's a good chance you're not going to land the kind of big title that surprised everybody that's coming out this year. So I like to go much more moderate with a couple games that I know are going to come out, not going to require that much budget to kind of lock them up, fill out the roster a little bit, but still giving me the flex to basically make the moves that I need to do. And then kind of on the flip side, if there are no restrictions and you kind of can just drop games at your as you want and there's no midseason counter picks, what I'll do is I'll do a hybrid of that. So I will fill the roster, and it'll be a mix of those same games that I've been targeting that kind of have those release dates, but also some big swings for the things that are just sitting there on the waiver wire that, like you said, have that potential to score high, but don't necessarily have a release date. There's not a lot of confidence, but I know that I can just move them in and out afterwards, kind of pawn pieces. And mostly because I don't want other people to have them. I don't know if that's weird, but that's kind
Exactly.
of my big thing.
No,
Yeah.
I I can think back to an example. I picked up unannounced Astrobot platformer game prior to the release in one league last year. I think there had been a few rumors, but nothing like concrete. It was still, maybe a month before it actually was released, and I just had it
Mm.
kind of sitting on my roster. And that those are the kind of those are the types of swings that I think are worth taking. I mean, obviously that one really worked out for me, but like even if had it not been announced in at the kind of the Summer Games Fest PlayStation timeframe, then I would have just dropped it probably. Something else had come along, but like being able to kind of sit on it and try to beat that rush because
Yeah.
yeah, like that was a game after that it was announced in other leagues that I didn't have it in. Like it was everybody in the league basically was bidding on it, and you're spending if
Yeah.
you want to get it, you got to basically spend almost your entire budget remaining to get it. So
And the budget management is real. So if we stick with this Astrobot topic, like cheap early released games that are have good chance of scoring decently well is good because it also helps you protect that budget for when something does come out,
exactly.
like a big title like Astrobot. I think I spent, I want to say 61, maybe $62 of my league budget last year on Astrobot, and it helped me win. But it's only because I felt confident that the other games that were sitting there were gonna make up the difference. I wasn't competing for every game that was announced, and that just allowed me to make that move when the time came. So be mindful of kind of how much budget you have throughout the year. I wouldn't spend it all at once. There are going to be games that are coming out later on in the year that we don't know about yet. It happens every year. So I think the best advice I can give is, don't spend it all in one place, and especially not early on. I think it's one of those things where you do want to wait. You want to protect that budget so that you have it to make the moves that are needed later on in the season.
I agree 100%. Yeah, I think that's it's really crucial. Like early on, it's okay to let, especially kind of close to the draft. It's probably
Mm-hmm.
it's quite okay to let some go. You can still
So
bid on
yeah,
them, but don't blow don't blow your load too early. It's like it's like you've got a long season, right? Just
yeah,
it's okay if you miss out on some, especially right after, because most of the good stuff is already gone anyways. Like
yep, yep,
the likelihood that you're going to hit a game that uh that you need to spend 20 or 25 or $30 of your budget right after the draft that's going to score a 90. The likelihood
yeah,
of this is very
very
low.
low.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I guess the other kind of big number one rule, and we see this kind of, I'm sure everybody's seen this in different leagues that they're in, is players just not filling out their rosters. Like they do the draft, it's a lot of hype early on. Maybe they're engaged and following along, but then somewhere along it is a long season, but somewhere along the line, they just kind of forget. Or what also happens is they're watching different showcases, they're watching directs and not connecting the dots in their head that while they're super excited for these games that are being announced, it also has relevancy for Fantasy Critic that they should be, going in, making their bids. So keeping the attention locked and keeping focused and making sure that you're kind of updating your team is another kind of critical move.
I mean, you can't win from the draft alone. So if you like,
Yeah.
that is maybe the most important advice that we can give is use the
Mhm.
waiver wire. You've got to use the waiver wire if you want to win the league. And yeah.
Yep. Well, last year, not to talk too much about Silksong again, but I'll say just last year, my first two picks, and it was an auto draft situation last year, but the first two picks were Silksong and Micro Flight Sim
Hmm.
that came out last year. And you can imagine that neither of those games helped me last year, right? They were actually baggage on me. And so it just points to how important the waiver wire is in terms of ensuring that you put yourself in a position to win. It's almost more important than the draft in some cases.
Yeah. One little maybe tip that I just found out that you could do this year is if you you can have the website kind of like update you on
Mm,
various things. So one of the leagues that I'm, maybe this is a good time to talk about. There's two types of bidding, right? We've mentioned it previously. There's a public bidding and a private bidding, and I would say private bidding is probably the more popular option. But in this one league where we do public bids, in addition to the public bids being made public on Thursdays, I also get an email about it. So I don't have to
mm.
necessarily check the site. I don't necessarily, it's also got a bot in our Discord service. I don't have to necessarily check that. I get an email. So you can get email updates about transactions and stuff like that. And so that is a valuable tool actually, because I've got the 4 leagues on the go here
Yeah.
just to kind of like, oh yeah, okay, those public, now I can go see what was bid on in that league, and if I want to make an adjustment or make a bid myself, I can.
Yeah, those Discord bots are super helpful, even
Yep.
just with updates and just general gaming announcements. I know that if you have it aligned to your Discord, it's super helpful. Keeping people engaged, it
Yep.
kind of pops up when there's new news, and that's also a very good tactic.
Yep.
Any difference in your strategy when it comes to private or public bidding at all, Marcus? Or you just kind of like,
Yeah, not really. I wouldn't say. I think like, yeah, I'm probably a little bit more aggressive with the public bidding, I would say,
yep,
because
yep,
you know, everybody's seeing what you're bidding on. So if you do really want the game, you probably should bid a little bit more money than you might otherwise if nobody can see those bids.
yeah,
So that's,
try and scare people off. Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, I mean they can't see the value of your bid, but they know that it's been bid on. So chances are, if
Yeah,
if it's not, it's a lot less likely to slide by and kind of like be,
right.
a game that's been not noticed by others. So if you want it, you should bid enough to get it.
Yeah. I
It
did see I did see one tactic at the end of last Fantasy Critic season being discussed, which was ways of masking the game that you truly want to select. So essentially creating like especially when you only have like one roster spot left,
mm.
creating like 5 bids and just putting the game that you actually want as the top priority
Oh,
as
I
a way of
see.
masking where your actual intentions lie, which
Yeah,
is pretty controversial. I could tell you that the Discord that I was monitoring was
not a fan.
split on whether something like yeah.
Yeah,
I thought it was ingenious. I wish I
yeah,
had thought of it, but just a little tip for you later on in the season if you're willing to do that kind of thing. But
yeah, yeah. It seems kind of an interesting way to do it. I mean, I guess if it is the obvious best game, that it's not necessarily
yeah,
going to fool a lot of people, but you could kind of clog up the whole thing, and maybe people just kind of miss it because there's a list of
exactly.
30 games or something.
Yeah. But otherwise, with private bidding, I think you just kind of you try and get things at a low value. But
Oh, the other thing too is if you happen to know the other players in your league, like personally,
yeah,
their game tastes, things like that. If they,
hmm,
you can start to, as the season kind of goes on, you can take a look at. Well, I know my friend John. He really loves this franchise. There's almost certainly that new game was announced for the franchise. He's probably going to put a bid in for that game. Oh, but John doesn't have any roster spots. Maybe he can't, and we can't make moves. So I'm probably safe because he's the only one I know that likes that title. So you kind of have to. It's a bit like poker in that way, I suppose. Like you're sitting
yeah,
around the table, you know people's
yeah,
tells. You kind of like you can use a little bit of information that you might have to be able to kind of do your bid amount, and you're not going to win every bid that you put out there. So,
no,
but I
yeah,
my whenever people ask for advice, my advice is always, if you really want a game, make sure you bid enough high enough so that you get it.
yeah.
Like if
I
you
was going to
really
ask
want a
how
game.
you determine how much to bid on a game. Is
Yeah.
there anything that you deploy like outside of the budget management that we spoke about earlier? Anything that you kind of think through when you're putting a bid out?
Not really. It's more, well, I guess I kind of do. I'm trying to think of what it is. It really depends on um what's happening, like the
Mm,
timing of the bidding. I find that there
yeah,
are times that, like, if there's a quiet period, as an example, there hasn't been a big showcase announcement. It's maybe relatively a quiet week. You can probably sneak in and there's a game that you're interested in, you can probably get it for less than you might be able to get it on a busier week, a lot more of a
Yeah.
news week. So, maybe that's a week where you put a sneaky $0 bid, if that's allowed, or a $1 bid on a
Yeah.
game when things are just quiet. And it's tougher. The kind of the max limit is a little bit trickier because it takes some time to maybe feel out like what people in your league might be willing to go, because you're trying to kind of guess like,
Yeah.
well, this is a game that most people might want. We'll use the Astrobot as another as an
Hmm.
example again, right? I think that was a game that was highly anticipated. Most people are going to want that on their roster. It was kind of in the middle of the year, right? That it was announced with its date. So by that point, you've got a little bit of data in terms of like who's the
Hmm.
big spenders in the league, who has likely to has the budget, and maybe you think is willing to put a bid in, is active enough to make sure that they're putting bids in. There may only be like a handful of those, but you kind of use a little bit of that information. And again, I would try to identify what you think the top bid would be for it from somebody else and go a little bit above that, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's about like those are the things I think about. Like if I break it down, it's you kind of nailed it. Who else and what are they interested in? Right? Like that's kind of like what you can use. How many spots you have left? Because I think that's a big consideration, how
Mm,
much budget you want to spend. Because you have to actually, for something like Astronaut, you can break the bank because you only have that one spot or something to that effect.
that's a really good point too. Yeah.
The time of the year, I think you nailed it, right? Early on in the season, you're paying a premium if you're going to compete on the waiver wire because everybody's going after a lot of games. Or if a conference has just happened or people are thinking about Fantasy Critic, you're paying a premium. And then something else I would do, depending on like who you're going up against and where your standings are, especially like if you're in a leader position, if you're in first place or you're trying to like protect the lead, whatever. I'm also looking at how much my opponents have left in their budgets. That's something that we may not always think about, but like keeping an eye on potential others that may be interested in that game. If they only have, by way of an example, a $15 budget remaining, well, all you need to do to ensure that you're going to take it is bid $16.
Exactly.
So, like, keeping that in mind and just thinking through kind of all those kind of equations, it becomes more relevant probably towards the end of the season. But those are kind of, I think, four criteria that you can use to really help round out a bid
Yep.
and at least get some value out of the waiver wire.
Totally. Yep. I agree.
So that's our deep dive on the waiver wire. I think this is a good time to switch it up and move into the news, Marcus, if that's okay. There's been a lot of news in this first month of
There really
2025.
has. Yeah. For a
Yeah, lots
January,
to
there,
talk about.
lots to talk about.
Yeah, so let's start with the official reveal of the Switch 2. This is something that got announced. I think most people will have seen it by now. Just over a 2 minute clip showing us what the next Switch 2 is going to look like. And I think April 2nd was announced as the date for, I guess, the official direct that will give us more information and probably more information about the games that are going to be coming along with that new console. I guess the big one here is Mario Kart. The
Yeah.
next Mario Kart, they seem to suggest that a new Mario Kart will be accompanying this new Switch, and that is big news for everyone. I don't know, Marcus, any thoughts on this
Well, it
outside
would
of
be
the obvious?
pretty. It would be quite the pull the rug on if there isn't a Mario Kart. I feel like
Yeah,
it's by essentially confirmed at this point. You're of the two of us. You're much more the Nintendo person than
okay.
me.
Yeah,
But
I'm
yeah,
very
like
excited.
so. I feel like Mario Kart is basically assured,
Mhm.
but there's probably a lot more to come. And I don't know. Have you heard much in terms of like other? I don't know. I guess it's kind of rumors. I don't know if we want to get into that at this point, but like other potential Nintendo Switch launch stuff.
So I, outside of the obvious, like bringing it back to a fantasy critic lens,
Hmm.
like in the leagues that I'm in, obviously 3D platform Mario is gone. Mario Kart was already gone in both
Yep.
leagues. Some leagues also had Mario Kart counterpicked,
Mm,
which for those people, it's going to
yeah.
be real tough.
Yep.
Um, Outside of that, I was looking at the Nate the Hate kind of reporting on this because obviously the selection of the actual release date for the trailer kind of gave everybody a lot more confidence in what he was kind of talking about. There's a lot of ports that he was referencing, so I
Okay.
don't know unless those are like remasters or definitive editions whether those would matter for Fantasy Critic. Things like Final Fantasy VII and a couple of Assassin's Creed ports. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I doubt they're probably going to get their own review scores. There was something in there though that talked about Metal Gear Solid Delta.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so maybe that's a pointing to give some people that drafted a new Metal Gear some confidence that there could come out that could come out this year.
And so, when do you think? And again, I'm not really in that Nintendo world nearly as much as you are. So, what are we thinking in terms of the actual Switch 2 release?
Yeah,
And presumably, it's in the summer,
yeah. I think that's
July-ish.
where the
Yeah.
yeah I think that's where the common prediction is. You know,
Yeah.
if it's being shown in April, then it's going to be probably released summer,
Yeah.
June. I would say no later than the fall. But regardless, I think we're going to see some new games this year. Yeah, take those big swings if you have no restrictions on you. So I
Yeah.
know I already have. You know, there's a couple of rumors from last year that were still swirling around Fire Emblem titles. So I
Okay.
know that in a couple of leagues, the league that I'm in, where there are no restrictions, I've made a couple purchases there because I knew no one else was going to be going after them. So that was exciting stuff.
Is there any other first party Nintendo stuff, unannounced first party Nintendo games that you might consider um, as a launch window title, something that might come out before the end of the year?
If you have no restrictions,
Yeah. Like, is it? Are we? Are is Animal Crossing a possibility in your
it's
mind?
not.
Is
I don't think it's a.
Splatoon 4? Is
Yeah,
like any of these
yeah.
Luigi's Mansion?
I mean, anything's possible.
Sure.
The reason I went with Fire Emblem is because there was like smoke last year
Okay.
regarding the Fire Emblem, whether it's a remake of, I think, Genealogy of the Holy War or a new Fire Emblem title. I would suggest, I mean, again, if you have no restrictions, you could do Animal Crossing just to hold something,
Yeah.
but I really doubt it. I
Yeah.
really doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
kind of the same
They
mind.
have,
I feel like,
yeah.
again, with my limited Nintendo knowledge, I suppose, like, I feel like chances are Mario Kart and
Mm.
3D Mario platformer were already taken at your draft. They were taken in every draft
New
that I part.
Kirby,
New Kirby.
new Kirby game. But
Okay.
again, like, yeah, I don't know. There will be something there that we haven't thought about, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to find out what it is. But otherwise, I just find it wild to have, you and I started this podcast this year, and it's a little bit of like I feel guilty. Like talked about Switch 2
Yeah.
first year doing this with so many other people kind of like in the wilderness for so long waiting for this thing to drop. We're like, hey, it's
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
Anyway, that's an aside. Next up, we had the Xbox Developer Direct, where we saw a number of titles. I'm going to go through these and we'll kind of stop at each one. So the first one was Ninja Gaiden 4, which is tentatively tracking for fall 2025. At least that's what they're
That's what
suggesting,
they're
which is
saying.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also got a shadow drop for Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. Amazingly, I think 0.7% of people already had Ninja Gaiden 4 drafted or published. So somebody was paying attention out there.
Somebody
It
were
was
throwing some
counterpicked.
darts maybe and actually had it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Counterpicked by 23% of people in terms
Well,
of,
yeah.
yeah, somebody's been feeling that. So what do you think about Ninja Gaiden 4 in terms of where would you put this in your kind of thinking for the year?
I am in any of my leagues. I'm not super high on it. I don't. Maybe I should
Hmm.
be a little higher. I'm not. I feel like this is a game. This is exactly maybe one of those examples of I'm okay to let this one go past. I think it could
Yeah.
be good. I think, but I don't think I'm willing to spend as much of my budget on it as I would need to actually acquire
Yeah.
it at this point. So I'm okay. I feel like this could be a game that's in those high 70s to mid 80s at the very highest. Probably that's probably very optimistic, but like,
Yeah, I was looking at the history of the franchise, and it is all over the place. So, including some really high scores. So I don't know. I'm kind of with you. I wouldn't mind having it on my team, but I kind of probably will just let it slide.
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible that it doesn't hit this year as well. Like
Yeah,
I'm never super excited when early in the year we get a kind of a launch window later in the year that's not actually a date. Like I don't know, I those it's not uncommon for those things to get pushed, and
yeah, falls a bit tentative. It scares me. It
yeah,
scares me.
yeah.
The next game we saw was South of Midnight, which does have an April 8th. Looks great. Very excited to play this one. I know that we talked about it a little bit last episode. Did not draft it. I'm hoping to be surprised and I'm hoping to be proven wrong. I'm actually hoping I'm proven wrong on this one.
I'm really looking forward to playing this game. I'm
Yes.
very interested to see how it ends up scoring. I'm
Yeah.
still a little unsure, and it's really I think the game looks fantastic. So
Yeah.
it's really more of a comment on Compulsion's track record of
Exactly.
they haven't scored had games that have scored particularly well in the past. So hopefully they can buck that trend and be a little higher. This is not a game that is available to be picked up at this point. It will
Yeah.
have been
It's
drafted in
gone.
basically every league.
Yeah.
So it's not really a comment on whether or not you should pick it up or anything at this point. But I don't know. I think it looks great, and I just hope that it is able to deliver. Really,
The next one is a little bit of a different tale. Clear Obscure Expedition 33 with an April 24th release date. All those people that drafted this, very excited to see that release date kind of come out so early in the year.
yeah. I did pick this up in one league. It was a 16 team league, and there was a fair amount of restrictions in this league on like the types of games. So weren't allowed to pick DLC and no remasters and no. So like
Hmm.
and I had the 16th pick, so I it was getting pretty thin by the end of it, and I've been pretty keen on this game, despite the fact that I think I had called this a boomer bust in our draft
Mhm.
episode. But I think this has the potential of scoring really well. I think it showed really well each time. But again, it's a new dev. Could also go a little bit lower, but I'm optimistic. And again, this is another one I'm really looking forward to playing. And kind of surprised that both of these games, South of Midnight and Expedition 33, are coming out in such close proximity to one another.
Yeah. And no different from the fourth game that they announced, which is Doom the Dark Ages
Yeah,
with a May 15th release date. It's going to be a busy spring. This was another boomer bust because mostly because we didn't know about the date. And we did say if it gets a date,
yeah,
it's going to rock. And game looks amazing.
yeah.
So good on. I was targeting this one. I still wanted to grab it and I did not get it. And I'm disappointed, but I'm very excited to play this one.
Yeah, I didn't end up with this one in any of my leagues. I'm not very much of a Doom person, so I don't know that I will play this myself. But I think that anybody who drafted this game is going to be quite happy with it because I think it's going to appease the fan base, and I think it's going to score really well. So
And all four of those games available day one on Game Pass. So that's pretty awesome. Next, we'll talk about some new dates, release dates that we did get since the last time we chatted, some changes. So Assassin's Creed Shadows delayed again to March 20th, which I know, Marcus, you're very skeptical about this additional delay to this game.
yeah, I think that I've thought a little bit more about this Assassin's, and I think that this game is going to struggle to score well, and this is, I kind of outlined my case. I think last episode, Ubisoft has
Hmm.
had a rough go of late. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a different story here, but
Hmm.
I do think that this month delay probably helps the review scores. Whether or not and it may only bump them up. We'll never know kind of like what the alternative world where it did
Yeah.
release in February, but I could see this bumping it up a few points overall, getting an extra bit of time to polish the game. And so, yeah, I don't think that this hurts it, but I still would be maybe pretty surprised to see this score over 80. This is actually sitting as a on the waiver wire in one of my leagues. So
Really?
yeah,
Well, I mean, the previews are out as we're talking.
yep,
I don't know. So the previews have been pretty positive
yep.
from what I've seen. I'm hopeful that it's going to score well. I will agree with you that Ubisoft's gotten a bit of a rough ride. Having played it, and here's where we separate the emotion from
Yeah,
the fantasy critic. Like the games are don't deserve the low score they're getting.
right,
Like full out. If I had to call out some people right now in terms of reviewers, like Star Wars Outlaws is not the score that it says on Open Critic. That's just my personal opinion, but I'm not a reviewer.
right.
There's other examples of this across the board in other areas where Ubisoft's kind of getting that raw deal. If who knows why. Um, so when it comes to Fantasy Critic, I kind of agree with you, like avoid it. But I'm super excited to play this.
Yeah.
And the previews are making me. I don't know when we're going to play all these games. I just said there's 5 games in a row there that I want to play. So I don't know. But yeah, I would probably still just pass on it because you can't have every game on your roster. But that one hurts a little bit. So
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I won't be shocked if this kind of creeps into the 80s, maybe even approaches an 85. That won't be like the most shocking thing I've ever seen in fantasy. But yeah, I'm just not gonna. I'm not.
77 is more realistic.
I feel like it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. We'll see where it goes. Next one up, Remastered Collection set for April 18th. I don't have a big experience with this series, but I know a couple RPG Cave hosts that both have it in each of their respective leagues. So good on them for picking it up before it had a date, and now it has that kind of release date.
The
So
people that love Lunar really love Lunar, so I think they're
mhm.
probably pretty excited about this. I was kind of curious, so I did actually see if I could dig up review scores for the original releases. It was predates OpenCritic, but I was able to find some review scores on Metacritic, which similar sort of deal. The original Lunar One Silver Star story only scored a 78 on Metacritic, and this is 1999. The sequel, Eternal Blue, which came out the year after 2000, it scored quite a bit better, 86. It looks like there was already a remake of the first game that came out on PSP in 2010, and it was an 80. So, if we're kind of like looking at that as a bit of a guide, it's probably, I would feel comfortable saying that it's probably a low 80s sort of thing,
Low
unless they
wages.
kind of
Yeah,
mess it up. But yeah, it's
yeah.
probably a decent bet if it happens to be available for you and you need to fill that DLC slot or something. Or sorry, the remaster remake
Hmm.
slot. Yeah.
Hmm. Next up, we have Everhood 2, which has a March 4th release date. I'm not familiar with Everhood, so I leave this one to you, Marks.
Well, I wasn't at all either until you put it on our list, but I did look into Everhood One, which
Hmm.
is kind of it's an action RPG kind of rhythm game, and the first
Right.
game
Yeah.
scored an 82. So I think
Yep.
and that came out in 2021. So I think that two is probably a decent pickup if it happens to be in your league. It's probably a decent bet for safe points.
And then that kind of brings us to the next one, which is Fuga Melodies of Steel 3 with a May 28th release date. Similar, I think the first two had kind of low 80s. This one probably, let's call it a relatively safe low 80s. I think the last one, number two, got an 83. So I'd expect this one to kind of land in that same range.
Yeah, I think this is one of my top pickups in all of my leagues this week. I think it's something that's probably flying under the radar for a lot of folks, and I
Hmm.
think it's a safe bet for like that 82 to 84 range, and it's got a release date. And so yeah, this is a real easy and again something you could probably pick up for a buck.
Yeah, same here. I got them bids in this week for both of them. So I'm hoping those
Yeah.
go through
So you're
this week.
probably by the time you're listening to this, the bids are for this past week have
Hmm.
probably already gone up. But if it still happens
And
to be
that's why I feel
available,
comfortable.
yeah,
That's
exactly,
why I'm so comfortable saying that out
yeah.
loud. So
But if
yeah.
it happens to be available in your league, I would consider putting in a claim.
Next up is Phantom Blade Zero. We did see a gameplay trailer for this with, I guess, the date to be revealed in 2025.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of strategy that game they set out a trailer and say we're going to release they're going to tell you the date later this year. So it's kind of
Hmm.
like, um, but the reason that this one caught my eye is because I happened to counterpick this in one league, and I was like, ooh, I looked at that trailer, and it looks pretty good.
Yeah,
I was like, oh,
it's
I don't
good.
know if that was a good counterpick. So we will
Let's hope
see.
there's a six. Let's hope
Yeah.
there's a six at the
So,
end of that one.
so when
Yeah,
later, in September, when they eventually, announce the
Jan
release date,
1st.
it's for January 2026 or something like that.
Yeah. And the last game on our list here is Earthblade, which unfortunately was announced as canceled. I know this is one that we had talked about in the last episode. For me, this was one that was, I think, if it had hit, would have hit really well. Obviously, the same developers as Celeste, and for reasons that they outlined in their statement, it's been canceled. Which I think for me, this one, this is a fun, Fantasy Critic is a lot of fun. We talked about it earlier. It's great when you have a situation like this where a game is actually canceled because of a variety of factors, but it's actually impacting people's lives. You kind of, it kind of does step you out of we're having a fun time picking, what review scores games are going to get. But this one did hit a little bit close to home. I don't know, Marcus, if you had any thoughts on the cancellation of Earthblade.
Not really. It's just a big bummer. Yeah, like like
Yeah,
you, I'm a big fan of Celeste, or was a big fan of Celeste, and I was really looking forward to being able to play this game. Um,
yeah.
I guess in terms of fantasy, if you have it and you're able to drop it, you should drop it, and pick up something else that's eventually going to come out. So.
In terms of new game announcements, we did hear of a few new ones that are coming out. First up, Blood of the Dawn Walker. I actually didn't see the trailer for this. I actually don't know what this is.
Oh, really? So it's by the a group that had worked on The Witcher 3. So some of the devs
Hmm.
from Witcher 3, and it's all cinematic trailer. It was really it just looked really good. I wanted to bring it up because it was kind of making the news around I don't know, around a week ago when it first came out. But I would not don't touch this. It's not coming out anytime soon. It looks really
Okay.
good, but don't touch it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
Avoid this
Good.
one. Yeah.
Good advice. All
Yeah.
right. The next one up is Little Gator Game in the Dark, which I guess is a follow up or sequel to Little Gator Game.
I think it's just DLC. I'm pretty sure
Oh,
it's
it's
just a
DLC.
DLC. But
Oh.
Little Gator Game, for those that may not know, is a kind of a cute little 3D, I guess platformer, kind of like exploration game. There's no combat. It's really adorable, and the main game scored an 83. So um, the this DLC doesn't have a release date as of yet, but I'd be kind of shocked if they're releasing or they're kind of announcing it in January that it isn't coming out this year. So again, if you're needing to kind of add a DLC, I think there are probably a lot worse options than it.
And the last piece to talk about where we want to kind of dive into the rumor mill. We've talked a little bit already about what we're hearing regarding Switch 2 and what might be out there or coming up for Switch 2 fans. There was also connected to the Switch 2 a wild theory. If you really want to get into the weeds of it, just go to, like, IGN has an article on this. It was regarding Team Cherry and Silk Song. And from what I can tell, essentially it was a tweet by one of the developers and someone who hadn't tweeted in a long time. And there were connections being made between an image they included in a tweet and where that image was linked to. And that image of cake that it was linked to, or this recipe, had a date on the website of April 2nd, 2024. And April 2nd is the date of the Nintendo
Wow.
Switch 2 Direct. And so people were jumping to some serious conclusions that they expect to see Silk Song at the Switch 2 reveal in April. In April,
The
and you know what?
conspiracy theories are real, man. They are really
I'm
leading you down
here
a path.
for the
Yeah.
hopium. I'm here for the hopium. I am all on board for that to happen, and we will see. But it is a wild thing to follow this Silk Song story. So I feel like we need like a Silk Song watch. Like
Yeah.
anything happened today? No,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
this
Yeah.
could be just like an update through the year. But well, we'll see if that comes true. Anyway, the next thing we want to cover off is just looking back at the games that released this month. So we have a number of games that released in January. and it's been a pretty strong start to the year. The
An
first one up,
incredibly strong. So I'm gonna sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
it is
no, go ahead.
surprisingly incredible start to the year. Yeah,
Yeah. I don't think I had any of these games on my list, or not on my list, but that I've drafted. First one is E's Memoir, Oath of Thilgana. Score is currently sitting at an 83 on Open Critic. Dynasty Warriors Origin, which I actively overlooked in the draft, is sitting at an 81, which is
I
great for
almost counterpicked it
Warriors
in the
game.
league that I think I counterpicked Phantom Blade Zero, but I was like
Yeah.
I was hovering over counterpicking Dynasty Warriors because typically those games don't review that well.
I I I stay away I don't know
Yeah,
what to do with Warrior
yeah,
games. I just,
yeah.
it's hit or miss. Freedom Wars Remastered is sitting at a 73.
Yeah, a bit of a bummer to hear. I know that's kind of a darling in the from the PlayStation Vita days.
Tales of Grace's F Remastered at an 83. Speaking of remastered RPGs from days before,
Yep.
83, strong outcome for this one. Donkey Kong Country Returns sits at a 78. Probably about right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I thought it would have been maybe slightly higher given I think the original got like an 83 or something, but you know, I think the full price thing maybe did it in a bit.
Yeah. This one was drafted in a lot of the leagues that I played in. At least the leagues that I drafted in that
Yeah.
drafted prior to its release. It was basically drafted. So yeah.
Yeah, and not early. So I think 78 is not bad return on that kind of
Yep.
investment.
It's okay.
Yeah, Blade Chimera is sitting at an 82.
Yeah, I don't really know too much about this game, but after seeing the reviews, this is often how I gain my
Hmm.
kind of take a fantasy outside of it. But like, I'll take a look at Open Critic and be like, oh, I hadn't heard of that game. It scored it's got an 80. It's sitting at an 82.
Hmm.
I'm gonna take a look at it and maybe kind of get interested in it that way. And that's kind of what happened with Blade Chimera. It looks like a really cool game, and I hadn't heard of it, until we were doing some draft prep, and yeah, it looked great.
I can't remember if it was Blade Chimera or Ender Magnolia, which is actually an early access game.
Yeah, the Ender Magnolia is the early access. Yeah,
Oh, okay, so there we go.
yeah,
Okay, Ender Magnolia is sitting at an 89.
yeah,
It is an early access, so it may not count for some of your leagues, depending on your league rules.
yeah. I don't think it would have been available because it was in early access at the time of people would have been drafting. And
Hmm,
so, but geez, yeah, 89. That looks like a fantastic
that's
game.
great.
Sequel to Ender Lilies, which
Yep.
I own, but I have never gotten around to playing. So, but yeah, it looks great.
And the last one on the list is Lonely Mountains Snow Riders, which a couple people have drafted in the league that we're managing, Marcus.
Hmm.
Um, Interesting one where not enough top critic reviews yet on Open Critic, but close to a 90 on Metacritic. And this is one where, probably not on a lot of people's lists and poised to do very well. Let's kind of hope that the uh, additional top critic scores come in. I think there's three currently, and we talked about this last time around, where they were increasing the number of top critic scores that are needed to actually register a result on Open Critic. So
Yeah.
yeah, it could come in big. We're just waiting to see where
Yeah,
it
it'll
all
get
lands.
there. I would imagine it'll get there. It's on Game Pass, so I think that always
Hmm.
helps these smaller titles get enough reviews, especially because everybody has access, or a lot more people have access to them. So it'll get there, and yeah, it's a boon for the ones who happened to pick it up.
Okay, should we move on to some moves of the month?
Let's do it.
Hype check.
All right, so let's try and give where there's still some value to be found, a sneak peek into some highly anticipated games set to release in the time ahead. I don't know if you want to kick us off. I've got a couple on my list that one of which we already talked about, but where do you want to go with this, Marcus? Where do you want to start us? You want to kick
Yeah,
us
no,
off?
I say we start with it. I mean, we talked a little bit about it. I think
Sure.
Fuga Melodies of Steel 3. Have you played these games, by the way, John?
No,
No.
no, I just know that the people that are excited about them
Yeah.
are people I trust. So,
Same, same, same. So like,
1.8% published,
yeah,
0% counterpick so far. It's going to be out there. I think this is our lock.
yeah. I agree. I love it. I love everything about it. It's got the history. It's got devs that have done this before. It's got a date, and it's probably not one that's on very many people's radar. So like, yes, this is it.
So, in terms of your budget, what would you spend on this given where it stands right now?
Well, I would probably bid. Well, I guess I probably a couple of bucks. Like seriously,
Yeah.
I don't think you will need to do more than that because I don't think anybody's talking about this game other than us. And so if you happen to be listening to this, and unless everybody in your league is listening to Type Factor,
Yeah.
I think you're probably good to get away with a buck or two bid
Yeah.
on
For
this.
me, I'm willing to go up to probably in the $5, $6 range,
Yep.
spending a small chunk of cash just to get it on there because I do think it's probably going to be a safe 83.
Yep.
And for me, that's probably pretty valuable at this stage in the game, right? Kind of
100%.
this is one of those games where it's going to help fill out your roster, but also not cost you a lot and still give you flexibility to try and pick up something that's going to score even higher later on in the year where you don't have to take as much of a swing,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep. Well, how about we do a couple other ones? Maybe one that we have already mentioned as well. I think Everhood 2, if that happens to be
Yeah.
available, that's a great option for you. I think I do have it here. It was only 7.2%
Hmm.
published, so it's only owned by that many people. So chances are it's available in your league. It's coming out soon. The first game scored an 82. So yeah, there are definitely worse ads at this point than Everhood 2.
Yeah, that kind of follows a bit of a trend. My other one that I'm targeting in one of my leagues, which is probably more risky than the last two we've spoken about, but I find I like this one. Uh, you got to take a risk sometimes. This one is called Star of Providence. It's like I don't even know, 8-bit, not 8-bit. I don't know. It's a pixelated game.
Yep.
Uh, it's a director's cut though. What's slated to come out in February of 2025. At least that's what Fantasy Critic is indicating is a director's cut of a game that was initially released on PC in I think 2017, and it's a roguelike bullet hell game. It was scored an 83 on Metacritic for that PC release. Here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the conspiracy starts to come through in my mind, Marcus. So same publisher as Animal Well. So
Yep.
yeah, that's a
That's
good one.
Donkey, right? Donkey,
Yeah, I
isn't
think
it? Yeah,
so.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, director's cut is including a major update and a Nintendo Switch release.
Ah,
That's yes, yes. It's only 3.5% published, 0% counterpicked. Now, the reason I'm saying this is risky because all we got is a February 2025, which is around the corner. But maybe there's an indie direct, Marcus. Maybe there's an indie direct coming up. Something that might, help put something like this on the map. That's what I'm hoping for. I think it is risky in that the whole open critic and needing a certain number of top critic scores in order to register. I think that's where I'm a little bit scared, but I think it had enough the first time around, and I think this will probably draw enough attention if it does get any sort of positive publicity that it could be one of those sleeper picks that can turn the tide of the season. I don't know. I'm hoping an 85 potentially, but I really don't know what to make of this game. I've been in their Discord. I've been trying to like do the
you're really
research.
doing
I've
your
been
research.
really in the really in the weeds, but I'm sticking with it. I'm going down with this ship. So
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
So this Lost Records Bloom and Rage. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts on this? So this is a game that's only at the moment about 23% owned or published. So there's a decent chance it's still available in your league. It's a don't nod game. Don't nod
Mhm.
games tend to score pretty well, kind of in that high 70s, low 80s range typically.
Yep.
I haven't heard a lot of hype about this game. Where are you on it?
For me, this was actually one that I did have on my draft list,
Okay.
low down on my draft list, but it was there, especially if things went sideways. Like this is one where I probably would be okay having, but I purposely didn't pick it up off waiver because I just felt like there were probably better options out there. I think its basement is probably safe in the mid to high 70,
Yeah.
but I don't know what that ceiling looks like for this game. I don't think it goes too high.
So
I
this
think there's
game
probably
is
more
going to
risk.
be released in two parts. Did you know
Oh,
that?
I did not know that. I did not know
Yeah.
that.
And so I think I don't know if it's officially been confirmed or if it was rumor that they were supposed to be, the second part was going to be only a month apart, like sometime in March. But that second part has been delayed. I don't know if that was a rumor or if it's officially been delayed.
Mhm.
If it has a date at this point, I don't know how that might even affect reviews. Presumably,
It's
people
a bit
were,
risky.
yeah, but I don't know, like, if I don't know. I'm inclined personally to let it pass. I don't feel like it's probably worth a risk for me at this point. It looks interesting. I hope it's good. As I kind of, we hope
Yeah.
all these games are good. But yeah, I'm not. I don't know. Wasting is probably a little bit extreme, but I'm not using any of my budget to kind of pick it up at this
Yeah.
point.
To me, it's going to depend on the situation in your league. How deep
Yeah,
is your league? Where are people going? What's already gone? If I was in a position where I really need to fill up a spot with a secure release date, I might take a chance on it. But I think I'm probably with you. I passed on it for a reason. I expect to be proven wrong on this one. I probably see it. It looks interesting.
yeah,
So we'll see what happens.
yeah, yeah. And then this other one, this date everything that we've got listed here.
Yeah, I just like this one. I just
Yeah,
think it's such a weird concept for a game. I think if you look at the split between the publish and counterpicked, it's kind of 20, almost even. And I just think that's just because no one knows how to label this thing. But I think
yeah.
it's going to get a lot of reviews. I have no idea what it's going to be. It's either going to be amazing or, you know, trash fire. I'm really excited to see it though. Either way, I think it's going to be an interesting story because it's so unique. It's a game where you can date everything, including inanimate objects that kind of are anthropomorphized, and yeah, it's very, and they all have names, which is hilarious.
Yeah,
So I think it could be like, you know, it could have some appeal.
it's a game that I hadn't heard about until I started doing a little bit of research into these fantasy drafts. Like I must have missed anything about it.
Yeah.
But your reaction is not unlike. It's basically the same as what everybody that was interested. Like
Hmm.
seems the vibes around this game are positive. We talked about that last
Inno-
episode. Yeah,
Innovation can be rewarded. I feel
yeah.
like this is maybe an innovation that people are looking for.
It's
And
a
I
first
don't
time
think,
dev, so they don't have
yeah,
any history. So that can be good, but it may also be working against them a little bit. But probably has more risk than I'm willing to. But I'm very curious to see how this does. Like I'm
yeah,
probably not going to be picking it up in any leagues that
yeah,
I'm participating
no,
in, but it's an interesting one to see what happens to it. I don't know.
yeah. And I put this in my show notes. I don't know why, but if Rift of the Necrodancer is still available in anyone's league, just pick it up. Just do
Absolutely.
it.
I have that in all four of my leagues. I'm very high on that
Oh
game.
wow, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I did read something that they were like, "Oh, it's not. Maybe it doesn't hit as high." But I don't know. I don't trust. Yeah, it was fine. You're fine. Don't worry. It's a
yeah,
solid mid 80 score.
yeah.
Maybe higher. Okay. Next up, we've got a segment that we're very excited for called Pixel Prognostications,
That's right.
where we're going to actually try and predict what these games are actually going to score. And we're going to start with the games coming out in the next basically 30 days. So we got a list here of 7 games, and let's go for it, Marcus.
Let's
So the
do
first
it.
one up, yeah, first one up is Citizen Sleeper 2.
Yeah. So I guess I can go first. How
Yeah,
about we
let's
alter?
take turns.
How about yeah?
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
alternate here. So for Citizen Sleeper 2, I think I'm going to go. I'm going to go 84.
really.
Yeah.
It's going to be like
Yeah.
Price is Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to go 87.
87. Okay.
'Cause- Yeah,
Wow.
I think it's going to outperform its last one. I think people
Do
will
you?
be more
I'm
attuned to it
blanking
coming
on
out this year.
what the first one scored.
I
Was it
thought it was like
84
an
as well?
85. It was 80, 84, 85. It was in the mid
Okay.
80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This one I don't know. I'm going to say an 81 for this game.
Okay, you're higher on it than I. The first game
Mhm.
scored, I think it was like 71, 72, somewhere in that neighborhood. People seem really excited about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I'll go a little above the first game. I'm gonna go 75.
Okay, here we go, Marcus.
Yeah,
Your turn. Rift of the Necrodancer.
my turn. I'm 88. I'm pretty confident in this game. If we look at the previous games that this dev did. Rift or Crypt of the Necrodancer was their kind of the prequel to this, and it scored 89. There was Cadence of Hyrule that had a Zelda tie-in or whatever, and it was
Mhm.
86, I think. They also, the same publisher did a game called Cobalt Core, which is also around an 89.
Hmm.
So I think that I'm feeling pretty good about 88 for Rift of the Necrodancer.
I'm gonna go slightly lower, just at 86, sticking with kind of where Cadence was. I think
Yep.
that's probably where we're seeing
Yep.
it. Okay, Civ 7. This is the one where I have a hard time. So I've actually drafted this game, but I don't know enough about the genre to really make an educated guess here. I'm going to say 90 because I want it to be 90.
Yeah. That's actually what I was gonna
89.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, we can have the same. You can have the same score.
No, we're not doing the same score. I'll pick something
No,
different.
okay.
Yeah. Whew, it's hard for me to go 91. Let's go 89 then for Civ 7 for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually think 89 is probably the right answer there, but I'm just being optimistic. I didn't want to go 89 again.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Avowed. Oh,
Avowed.
interesting.
So I'm really high on Obsidian as a developer. I don't think that there is. We talked about this probably last episode a little bit too. I don't think that there's the buzz around Avowed that you'd maybe like to see in terms of like the excitement level around it, but everything else sounds really good. The previews sound really good. I'm gonna say 84 for Avowed.
Hmm. I think you're probably right on the money. I think it's probably going to be slight. Where do I want to go with this? I'm just going to say 85 because I think probably 84 is probably the best number. C probably it could increase slightly higher. Anyway, I'm just going to stick with 85. We'll see how wrong we are at the end of this. Like a dragon.
Yeah, I'm happy. Oh, I said this is your turn.
Am I
You go first.
first?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm happy saying an 89 for this.
Okay. I think that's probably a little high. I'm gonna say 86 for Pirate Yakuza.
I'm very optimistic. I'm trying to give the positive vibes out there.
Yeah, yeah,
I was listening to some previews and everybody seemed to just be enamored with some of the things it was doing. I don't know if everybody will be, but let's see. And then Monster Hunter Wilds.
So that's me. I guess I will go. Hmm. Is this gonna crack 90, John? I'm always hesitant to go anything above 90. Other,
You're
I'm
so
gonna say 90. I'm gonna
skeptical.
say 90. I'm gonna say 90 for
All
Monster
right.
Hunter Wilds. Yeah.
I'm going to say 92.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
It
think
was
this
the
is going to
first
be one
pick
of
in
the
a
top
lot of
scoring.
drafts. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'll be one of the top scoring games of the year.
Yeah.
People seem excited. There's a lot of positive vibes out there.
Yeah.
I think it's time. Yeah, and so we will report back on how that just went, and see how far off. Maybe we'll do a bit of a tally over the course of the year, seeing like how close we actually are in terms of points and differentials.
Yeah, I like that idea. I think we should. Yeah, I think we should keep track of how we do over the year
Yeah,
and
create a little
have
spreadsheet.
a healthy competition.
Yeah, if you
Yeah,
want to write in or send us a message on Blue Sky, you can
yeah,
participate. We'll keep track of your scores too.
you bet.
And before we close out the show for today, we just say we had a couple questions from different folks on Blue Sky, and we wanted to take the chance to answer them. Marcus, did you want to read out our first question?
Sure. The first question is from a good friend of ours, Drellish. And I'm paraphrasing here because he had messaged me, and he wanted to know how much stock we should put into the projected scores that you see on the website. So where you want to start, John? Your
I
thoughts?
mean, I don't put a ton of stock into it, especially with lesser known games where, especially indies, I just feel like it doesn't know how to, calculate what like something could be for those particular games. And so it really doesn't do you much justice. I think towards the end of a season, I think it does a better job when there's, potentially less releases. You can kind of get a sense of where people stand, what their projections are, especially if the titles that they have coming out, like it has a better read on them. But I don't give it much stock. Usually, it's nice to see yourself, especially after a draft with a high projected score. Gives you kind of that self confidence. I know a lot of people like seeing that, but for myself, I'm usually not giving it too much credence. I actually much rather look at kind of what we did tonight, the breakdown of the published versus counterpick, that ratio. I look at hype factor and those types of things to help determine more
Yeah,
over the kind of projected score.
I agree 100%. I think that I may even be a little more harsh on them. I think that they're almost next to completely useless. I don't put much stock. It is nice to see when after you've drafted and you're like, oh hey, I'm projected to be one of the top teams or near the top or whatever. But yeah, I'd be curious to know how those projected scores are calculated, because I've found them to be wildly inaccurate. Like they don't really do a great job, in my opinion, of kind of properly assessing like where a game should be. I think it really does undervalue indies.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. So don't put a lot of stock in them, Michael. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
And our next question, we actually had two questions that are very similar, so we're gonna do them together.
Yeah.
From Nagachaka and from Jace Backridge, kind of similar themes here. So both asking kind of what they should bid on so that they can win by a landslide or need more games to dominate. What kind of secrets do we have, Marcus, that we can share, insights, indie secrets, especially if you have any. I can jump in here first if you want, just because. So for Nagachaka, we actually did some digging. We asked him, send us who you've drafted, where the counter picks are at. Not bad. It's a very strong list. But we did recognize that he had counterpicked Claire Obscure, and I think for that the landslide may not be on
Yeah.
Nagachaka. The landslide might not be on, but we will give you some advice. It's not the end. We'll give you some picks to deal with. Also, being in the same league as me in one of my leagues doesn't help either. It's a bit of a conflict of interest, but I'll hopefully some of the stuff that we've laid out today is helpful.
Yeah.
What about you, Marcus?
Yeah, so maybe we'll start. Like John and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, but we're like, we'd rather like teach a man to fish rather than like give him a bunch of fish. That's not the way that.
Yeah, that's close enough. Good
Close
enough.
enough. You understand what I'm trying to say. So basically, like we're hoping to kind of like give you the tools to be able to make these decisions for you, and particularly when it comes to indie games, as Jace was asking about. There's maybe some specific kind of things that we'll want to that you kind of have to take into account, and we're going to focus a little bit more about the indie situation in our next episode. So stay
Yeah.
tuned for the indie kind of tips on that point. But we can give you a few kind of games. We've mentioned a few of the pickups as already.
Yeah.
That we
Jace,
like.
pick up Fuga, Jace. Pick up
Fuga is
Fuga
a
Melodies Skill
Fuga
Tree.
number 3. Yeah.
Matt Nagachaka, if you're listening, it's too late. I've already taken it. But Jace, you pick up Fuga.
Yeah. And I've got a couple others that we didn't actually mention that I think that Jace and Nagachaki, you're more than welcome to pick up. I think they're good options. One is called Miss Mulligatawny's School for Promising Girls. It's Inkle's next game. Inkle did a game that I recently played called Overboard, which reviewed really well. They've done a bunch of games, Highland Song. They did Heaven's Vault, which all reviewed kind of in that high 70s to high 80s score. And this is scheduled to release in spring of this year. So it should be coming out. And I think it's probably a really good option. Another one that I really love, I'd never heard of it until we started doing the drafts. It's called Blueprints. It's been taken in a few leagues. So it's 12.8% published at this point. And it's a first-time dev. So that's what usually kind of like scares me away a little bit when it comes to indies. But there's a couple reasons why I really like this game. It is scheduled for a spring. It's got a spring 2025 release window. So hopefully we'll get a date and it'll be coming out relatively soon. The publisher of Blueprints is called Raw Fury, and they publish good games that tend to score in the 80s, high 70s, and low to high 80s. Actually, Cassette Beast is one of the most recent ones, which scored an 86. I don't know if it was last year or the year before.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the most important thing that I really like about Blueprints, after having done a little bit more research, is that this game was previewed last summer. So this is something that is something to look for with indies when we don't necessarily have a lot of information. If it's been demoed or previewed, people were saying really good things about it, and well-reputed kind of outlets were saying good things about this Blueprint. So Daniel Mullins, who made like Inscription, a few other really high regarded indie games, was said it was the best game he played all year. PC Gamer basically the writer for the article said that they found their game of the year, even if it doesn't come out this year. Like that is some really high praise. So, and again, it's from people. It's not just Joe Schmo on the internet. So these are kind of more high regarded publications or something like that. So those are a couple that I think if they're available, they're probably pretty good options for you.
It's really good advice. So hopefully those helped. Hopefully those answers are going to help you guys with your leagues, and let us know how it goes. Let's know what you end up picking up, and if there's any, if they help you advance in your own individual leagues. Also, kind of like Michael Nagachaka and Jace did, if you have questions for Marcus and I, or have questions about your season, specific games, anything you're thinking about, please reach out to us. We are on Blue Sky, Hype Factor on Blue Sky. Happy to take your questions, or find us in the various Discords that we're in. Happy to incorporate them into the show. So that will do it for us. That was Hype Factor episode 3. Make sure you get those bids in. Make sure you fill up that roster. And before we close out the show, one of the things I want to do is shout out the Fantasy Critic website again. I know we did this in our first episode, but just to Steve and team, and say thank you for everything they do. They keep this really fun. And also their Patreon. If you haven't taken a look, they do have a Patreon for the Fantasy Critic website. Both Marcus and I are members now, as we're kind of running conferences for our different leagues that we're running. And it's great. It's they need the support. It's a great website, and it enables all of this. So take a look at that when you get the chance. So Marcus, where can the listeners out there reach you? Where can they find you?
People can reach me on Blue Sky as well. My handle there is Marcus O'Neill 79. I just echo the comments. We're not, we have no affiliation with the Fantasy Critic website. We just really love what Steve and the team over there do, and we really encourage you to support them if you can, or obviously you're playing the game, so that's good too. But we really appreciate what they do over there.
Also, in addition to his Blue Sky, Marcus is being humble here. Also, go and listen to Marcus on Tiny Game Chronicles, which is another podcast that he does about tiny game experiences. No, that's not the right slogan. plug Tiny Game Chronicles.
We discuss games that are quick plays but epic journeys. Me and Michael, one of the question askers earlier, we do that show, and we have a good time. We cover a game every other week, and if you're at all interested, you can check it out.
I realized we hadn't said that, so check out Tiny Game Chronicles. Finally, if you've liked what you heard from so far from Marcus and I, please give Hype Factor a positive 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. It's always much appreciated. And that'll do it for us. Until next time, get hype.
Remember, the information provided is for entertainment purposes only. Hype Factor does not guarantee the accuracy, completeness, or reliability of any advice or predictions offered. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that you are solely responsible for any decisions you make based on the information provided. We strongly encourage you to Fantasy Critic responsibly. And remember, this is just a game, and in no way impacts your status as a gamer. Hype Factor cannot be held responsible for any damages resulting from bad picks, drops, or overall Fs on your season.